Discernment is a rich word that comes up repeatedly when we talk about humanistic leadership in all of its different forms. Then we're going to have a great dialogue with Otto Scharmer and a great work on presencing and the Presencing Institute. And then I hope you'll stay tuned on December 8th when I'll be leading a dialogue on care and accountability with some of the background from our Barry Waymiller organization. Just to remind everybody, the Humanistic Leadership Academy is founded on this idea of creating a world that works for everyone by transforming business education. We take an expansive view of that by education in a lot of different forms, by forming humanistic leaders, honoring human dignity, and creating shared well-being on a healthy planet. And I think that's a great lead into our dialogue today on discernment, because reflecting, decision-making are critical to how we transform business education, how we develop ourselves and live out our calling as humanistic leaders, how we honor human dignity, and how we create shared well-being on a healthy planet. And so as I turn it over to Nicky and Paul, just a brief introduction of them both. It has been my honor to develop a friendship with each of them. Nicky over the last couple of years and Paul over the last few months. Nicky is a Jesuit priest who is also a marketing professor at Creighton University and sits on the board of a variety of different Jesuit universities and institutions, in addition to work with the Inspirational Paradigm. And I'll let them tell you the story, but has a long history of working with Paul, who is also a professor in business, in psychology, and a noted author on reflective practices and discernment from his rich history and experience. What we've invited them today is to have a dialogue with each other about discernment. They will lead you into a breakout session, and then we'll have a large group dialogue about what comes out from there. Nicky, can I turn it over to you with that introduction?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. And it's great to be here with all of you. I'll invite Paul to give a little bit more introduction about himself, and then I'll say a little bit before we get into a conversation between us. So Paul, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'm not sure, that's a little difficult, but let me just tell you a little bit of my stages of, I'm from India. So I grew up, my first 12 years were spent in a very Catholic environment. And at the age of 12, my family moved to another, we moved to another place where we were just 4 Christian families among 200 other families. So I got exposed to really living Eastern spirituality. And that for me was, was a great gift. And then at the age of 16 or 17, I joined the Jesuits. And the gift that, that the Jesuits gave me was the opportunity to really go deep into the spirituality of St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits. And then after being a Jesuit for 47 years, I decided, because of my discernment, I decided to leave the Jesuits. And so I've been kind of out of the Jesuits for about maybe 12 years now, but I still continue to follow the principles of St. Ignatius, and my life continues to be founded on the person, the life, and the teaching of Jesus. There's one thing, Jesus has never been, the rock of my life. Jesus has always been the springboard of my life that keeps throwing me out into, various groups and experiences that are right. That's something about me.
Great, thanks, Paul. So as Brian said, I'm a Jesuit, and I'm an associate professor of marketing at the Heider College of Business at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. Most people don't know about where Omaha, Nebraska is, so I tell them it's, it's right in the middle of the country. But just a little background. So Paul was actually my professor when I was studying theology back in India, and he was teaching a class on the spiritual exercises and on giving retreats, and he was also, because for my theology thesis, I had approached him if he would be willing to direct me. And my thesis was a very kind of outlandish thesis. It was a study of the marketing strategies of St. Ignatius of Loyola, which we did get published. But that's a little background to us. And so we'll have about 20 minutes or so with me asking Paul a couple of questions and weighing in, and then we'll get into breakout breakout groups for about 15 minutes or so before coming back for a conversation. So Paul, you are a renowned expert in Ignatian spirituality and discernment. And for those who are familiar with the Jesuits and with Ignatian spirituality, the term discernment is a term that is well known. But what about those who are not familiar and who have no knowledge of the Jesuits and Ignatian spirituality? How would you explain the term discernment to someone who doesn't know or who has never heard the term before?
All right. Well, that's a good question. I like to begin with, very often, like people equate discernment with decision making. They're related, but they're not the same. Because the goal of discernment, let me talk about it from the point of view of maybe Saint Ignatius and the spiritual exercises and all of that, or in the Christian understanding or the faith understanding. So the goal of discernment is to deepen my relationship with God, with the divine, with the great other or the higher power or whatever you want to call that. So the goal of discernment is to deepen that relationship. And out of that relationship will flow, decisions. And those decisions may not always be the right decision, but in that relationship with the divine and the God, we need to be willing to be wrong in order to learn how to be right, to develop our. But the goal is, even when you do not make the right decisions, if your relationship is deepening over there, then that's the right, discernment. Let me give you, for those of, those kind of who've got this faith tradition, but also do not have this faith tradition. Let's take marriage, for example. So when two people, vow that they love and they cherish one another, their vows are just to these two and not to the rest of the world. Those marriage vows do not include, I try to tell people, do not include that you love and cherish your mother-in-law. That's not part of the formula. You just love and cherish, the other person. And out of that love will flow decisions that you might make. And one of the things I also say, both in, with God, our relationship with God, and in a marriage relationship, the challenge of this loving relationship that is part of the discernment process is not to love. But the challenge of this loving relationship is to allow myself to be loved. Because the only love that I can give to the other person, the only love that will help me in this discernment process is the love that I've allowed myself to receive. All other love becomes selfish manipulation, and it will come back to hurt us. So the challenge of a loving relationship with God, with the divine, with my spouse, is not to love, but to allow myself to be loved. When you make those decisions, when you're making decisions in a marriage situation, your decisions have got to flow from this loving relationship. And even when your decision may not be the right one, willing to be wrong, as long as it strengthens the bond of this relationship, the discernment will be right, even though the decision wrong. Okay? I'm sure, the next question that Nicky will ask me will be, now in the professional world, how do you apply this, right?
I was just going to, you're right,
So how do we apply this in the professional world? Or how do we apply this, at the university or in business? I would maybe substitute relationship with God and with spouse with the mission statement. The mission statement of a university, the mission statement of business, and to focus on that mission statement, and all the decisions need to strengthen that mission statement. So even when you may not be when the decisions may be wrong, if the missions, I'm not saying that it is deliberately wrong, but we always wrong. We learn from what the mistakes we've made, so that we can make the right decision. So that's one.
So
Yeah.
So Paul, one of the things which I know we've kind of also spoken about with the HLA group is about, because you just use the word mistake, right? And and there are people who say that there's never really a mistake. It's just a learning moment, right?
Right. Yeah. So yes. So those are learning moments that will help us to keep growing. And again, discernment, both in our personal relationship, in our relationship with friends or spouses, in our relationship in the business, etc., is a transforming, it's a transforming process. It's not, the more we discern, the more we are transformed into the mission, into the relationship with spouses, or in our relationship with God.
Yeah, I just want to go back to one of which I think is a powerful statement, right? And when you said it's not so much about loving as allowing ourselves to be loved. So, and again, going back to a university setting or even a business setting, what is that? Can you say a little bit more about that in a university setting or a business setting, about not so much about what you do, about what you're doing, but about the receiving part, allowing yourself to receive love?
Well, you know what? First, I'll talk about something that is abstract. It's like it's not making the mission work, the mission statement work, but making the mission statement work in us and through us. So that will. What about at the university setting? So allowing myself to be, to receive love is okay. Let me explain it this way. So Mahatma Gandhi, had this whole satyagraha movement, and satyagraha is not nonviolence. Satya for Mahatma Gandhi was finding my identity in the divine essence and experiencing an interconnectedness of all of life. So in a university setting, it is like, say to experience my unique identity, in my relationship with God, with the divine, with my, with the higher power, but also experiencing an interconnectedness of all of everybody. So whatever happens to one of us affects the rest. And in a community, sometimes there are people who are reaching out to us, but we are too busy, to really recognize that. So to pay attention to that and to take that in. A little appreciation, a little comment, a little suggestion, a little kind of, something that happens during the day. One of the things that I tell people also at the end of the day, do not ask yourself, what more could I do, for the institution, for my spouse, for God, etc. But rather, at the end of the day, think about what was being done to me or done for me, or people reaching out to me that I was too busy to take, to pay attention to, and soak that in and sleep with that gratitude, and you'll never have a problem sleeping again. So sleeping with that. So that is what I'm saying is in a university community, it comes in different ways. A student might just say something. It hasn't to be something, very big. A little thing, a little comment, a little appreciation, you know, so just to take that. Now, again, if you're in a formal meeting, to be able to receive, what people are saying, to listen, and then to be able to build your decision making. I don't know whether that makes sense, but
yeah, no, that's fine. I just want to go back to with discernment. Are there any kind of like predispositions that one needs to have to make a good discernment?
yeah. So one of the things, again, I'll go with Saint Ignatius. He says one of the first requirements for the spiritual life and for discernment. He says it is grande animo. Grande animo is very difficult to translate in English. So it's the great spirit, enthusiastic, animated. So how important is your relationship, with your spouse, with the mission statement, with your relationship with God? How important is that? How excited are you about it? So that would be one of the first requirements for that. And then the next is to be open, to be open to the movements of, what would happen in your life, not to go with your predisposition and your own ideas, to be open, make yourself available, and then respond generously to what you have, what comes to you. And if you do that in a good discernment, in your relationship with God and your spouses and your university, it will generally take you beyond sacred boundaries and always seeking new horizons. So the discernment process is dynamic. The discernment process is transformative, it's transforming, in every aspect of life.
So are there different ways of making a discerned decision?
Yeah, there are different ways of. I kind of want to talk about, like Jesus and his temptations in the desert is a great paradigm for discernment. So, those of you who are not familiar with the Bible or whatever, so here's what happens. Jesus has this very powerful experience at his baptism, where, he has the experience of this intimacy with God. It's a totally new experience that he has with God, where the heavens open and God's voice is heard. You are my beloved. My favor rests on you. My delight is in you. So he has this intimate relationship. And then moved in that same movement, he goes to the desert. Now this becomes his relationship, foundational relationship with God. Now he goes to the desert and he has three basic human temptations. You can apply that to business. You can apply that to any aspect of your life. So the first temptation that Jesus has is where, he's asked to change the stone into bread. Now, bread stands for the material things of this world and the pleasures of life. Now, are material things of this world and the pleasures of life good? Of course they are. But for Jesus, what he says is, but that cannot be the source of my happiness and the meaning of my life. So the source of my happiness and the meaning of my life comes from this powerful experience that I have, with the divine, the spiritual connection that I have, The second temptation is when, like Satan takes him to the pinnacle of the temple and says, throw yourself down, because, as the scripture says, the angels will pick you up. Basically, what is applied in this temptation is, what will people say and think about me? Honor. They'll say Messiah, they'll say King of Kings, they'll say whatever. So what will people say and think about me? The honor. Is that good? That people speak well of us? Of course it is. But I cannot depend on people for my, what really matters, because the people that say wonderful things about me today will be the same ones who will be criticizing me and condemn me tomorrow. So that is not something that I can depend on. The only thing, like Jesus said, what he depends on is what does God say about him? How does God feel about us? God always feels good about us, so to receive that. So, and the final kind of, like when you're talking about discernment, Satan says, like, all these kingdoms I will give you will bow down and worship me. So that's a temptation to power and authority. Is power and authority good? Of course it is. Because when you have power, you don't need permission to do good. But today you have power, tomorrow you don't. The only power and authority we have comes from our relationship with God. And if you want to take the marriage kind of formula, the power and authority comes from my relationship with my spouse. My power and authority comes from my mission statement, So that would be, and basically, if you want to know a method of, method of discernment, one of the things that Ignatius says is the most authentic discernment is intuition. Intuitively, you know what is right and what is not. And then the mind comes in and the heart comes in. And then, of course, we've got this, the pros and the cons. The pros and the cons is not Ignatius, by the way, like of the positive and negative. It's not. Once you come to the decision, you got to take this back in your relationship with God and the divine, and then ratify that decision. Okay? I know Brian is looking at his watch. We are almost kind of.
Yeah.
All right, Nicky.
No, just what, and you've touched on this, but just kind of one last, just a few last comments, and before we get into breakout groups. But how does one go, about making discernment like a way of life, right? Whether you're in the university setting or whether you're in the business world, how do you go about making discernment? And you touched upon it, but just kind of like maybe a little repetition. How do you go about making discernment part of your life?
Here's what I do. I mean, one of the things that I kind of also, maybe later in the Q&A, we might be able to talk about it. What is the mission? What is the meaning and the message of my personal life? How do I find that? So here's how I make it my way of life. First thing in the morning, when I wake up, I think about my mission statement, my relationship with God. And I spend only 2 minutes there. My first 2 waking moments, I spend with that, just kind of, like setting the tone for the rest of the day. And then I don't think about it at all. And the last thing at night, before I fall asleep, then I go back and look over the day to see how this mission played out. Remember, how was this, what was happening to me that I did not pay attention? And then it will become your way of life. If you're, again, that grande animo, how much do you really want it to be your way? Maybe we can talk more later when you have questions.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. I think, maybe we can get into the breakout rooms, and David will, he will post some questions, or Brian will post.
Yeah, I'm going to post the questions right now in chat and set up the breakout rooms. As I do that, Nicky, I'd love to get your reaction, yes, as a Jesuit, but even more so as a business school professor. Paul's opened up a lot of different thoughts here. How do you apply this in a, secular profession, or in, as a business school professor? Because I want to acknowledge that we're here at the Humanistic Leadership Academy, not to recommend any one spiritual practice or other different things, but linking to the overall sense of humanness and spirituality and things. How do you manifest that self? You gave great questions to Paul, but before we go to breakout, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you.
No, I think it's similar, right? So what excites you about so for example, I started off in accounting. And then, accounting really didn't excite me that much, though I worked a lot of my life in accounting, and I got excited with marketing. And that's where kind of, and the piece of marketing that excites me is about kind of trying to understand the interests of others. And so that's really, and so that's where I think what Paul was alluding to was that, what excites you, what gives you meaning and passion and a sense of purpose. And that, so in my own setting in the business school, that's really kind of what would play into what discernment is like, is how do kind of I allow that passion and that purpose to be part of who I am and what I do. Did that give answer you,
You
Brian?
did a great job, and you also gave me enough time to get the questions posted in the chat and pull together the breakout sessions. So I'm going to open the breakout sessions right now. If you're familiar with Zoom, you can hit that go button. We're going to give everybody about 8 minutes and just talk with colleagues, about 3 or 4 to a group, on reflecting on what you've heard. And please bring questions and your own personal interactions. We'll give you about 8 minutes or so, and then we'll bring you back and build a good dialogue, continuing with Paul and Nicky and inviting more people into that dialogue as well. Welcome back, everybody. It takes about 60 seconds for different groups to come back. We hope that you enjoyed meeting a colleague, reflecting on this idea of discernment that Paul and Nicky have broken open for us. It'll be just a few more seconds before everybody has the chance to come back. We'll invite you. We'd love for you to share what some of the dialogue from your group was. And so you can raise your hand in Zoom if you want to come off mute and share that. Also, you can type a thought or reflection in the chat. It can be a comment, can be a question, and we'll continue to build that out for everybody. And so just a couple of seconds here, we'll get the balance of the group back. All right, that should be everybody returning from your breakout sessions. We hope that you had a good dialogue. And what we'll just invite is everybody, if you want to raise your hand in Zoom, that'll allow me to call on people if you'd like to come off mute and share whatever reflections your breakout groups had. You can also type in the chat comments or questions along the way. And really, for the balance of our time, we'd love to hear from you all reflecting on this topic. We know we're with other noted academics who have done work and things in this area, also have personal reflections, or have questions that can drive where we go next. And so please raise your hand if you'd like to come off mute, or type something in the chat, and we'll go from there. Who'd like to start us off? Yeah, Nathan, go ahead.
Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Corliss. I'm with the Gun Company. And the reflection that I was having conversation with Luis was about, Luis had mentioned, a lot of organizations have values, but do they live those values? And we try to be very intentional of, when we talk about care for our individuals, it's in our daily interactions. Are we treating people with respect? In my respective role, am I doing the best I can to listen to our team members, to ensure their voice is being heard, that their thoughts are being considered? And we understand that necessarily everyone's ideas is always going to come forward, but are we giving everyone that equal space and voice to share what's important to them? And how do we do our best to take care of that? Our conversation did pivot around, for our organization, talent management. And, sometimes you have to make hard decisions with individuals, but we can't just say they're not working out, they have to go. It's, did we put intentional effort into their development? Did we give them every opportunity and space to grow along that way? So, just making sure we're taking care of people and giving them the opportunity to grow and improve, and to recognize we all have gaps. Are we working to close those gaps and do our best for the individuals and the organization? It's a tough balance, but ideally the balance is heavier on taking care of the individual and giving them the growth opportunities. Because if you do that, they'll take care of the business.
Well, Nathan, you've broken up a lot of things there. And so Paul and Nicky, how would you like to respond? We're talking about the importance of having a vision and mission. We're talking about how we live that out, and specifically how we respond to individuals who might not be at the top of their game and need growth and development.
I think that's spot on in terms of because and when you think of even Catholic social teaching, the principle of subsidiarity, for example, is really kind of trying to create and empower people and give them the tools to be successful. So I think what Nathan was raising on was kind of like spot on, is in terms of trying to live out care in the organization involves sometimes kind of caring for people who are struggling and might not be at the top of their game, but making sure that they have the tools to to be better at what they're doing.
Yeah, Paul, did you want to add to that?
Not much, but except like what happens when there is a conflict, or there's when there is a disagreement, then what do we do? First, I guess we need to build trust in that group to say that I'm not perfect. I'm coming here from my honest kind of goal, and then so therefore we can have a conversation where we can disagree, and then the only thing I would add is then I need to be able to make a judgment without being judgmental. I need to be kind of critical without criticizing. And so therefore we are working on, and that's why I said so what is, when you're talking about your core values or the values of your group, I would go back again to the mission statement to say how does this relate to, honestly connected with that. But when it comes to disagreement, and then again, after some time, we honestly kind of, keep going back and forth, and without without being judgmental or feeling judged because I'm different. I think that would help.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I'm going to go to Brian. Brian, what question or comment you want to bring to us?
Great. I had the great pleasure of being in a breakout group with Peter and Alex, and Artie, the autopilot, which we assumed was the AI, joined us. Didn't have much to say, but Peter and Alex did a really good job of framing the participatory part of discernment, I think. So you're part of an organization. It has a set of missions. It's a set of values. It's a mission-based project. And that if one doesn't connect in a kind of subject way to that, those values can just be these sort of objective, third-party distanced kinds of goals or values that you're trying to plan for and engage in decision-making with. So Alex talked about how subjectivity is critical to this. And Peter, I'd never heard this phrase before, but Peter talked about not just discerning, but being discerned. In other words, putting oneself in that position to be the recipient of love, care, interest, concern, all of those kinds of things. And that no matter what faith you are of, what brand of spirituality you may have, that being discerned, that being a subject in the project, ties and links you to it as a person. And that was sort of key aspect of discernment. And they helped me wade my way through, I'll mention it very quickly, at our October, I'm at Gonzaga University, by the way. So our trustees and regents were on campus in October, and Professor Lighthouser and I, who is with us today, we went to the trustee lunch, and the chairwoman of our board of trustees said that without God, discernment is just good planning. And I've been trying to mull that around in my head, what that could mean and how to think about it. So thanks to Peter and Alex, I think I'm further down the road in discerning what she meant by that.
Cool. Thank you, Brian. Can I go to Elena to add a comment, and I'll see what Paul and Nicky want to say. Elena, what would you like to add?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this session. For me, I appreciate very much the framing of discernment as embodied. And as educators here, we all have this shared priority to humanize the experiences and support that. So many of us are starting to talk about human skills as opposed to soft skills. I just wanted to get some more help. And of course, I'm very much aligned with references to love. And I really appreciate the definition of allowing oneself to be loved. But I wanted to understand the distinctions of the practice of discernment from other practices that include reflection and formulating judgment to guide attention and action.
That's a great question to give to Paul and Nicky. Nicky, you want to go first there? Or Paul, I saw you came up. Paul,
Yeah, I'll let Paul go.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Kind of got lost in the...
Well, let me rephrase the question then. We talk about discernment. We also talk about other practices yoga, meditation, reflection, mindfulness, those things. To what degree is discernment a practice? And if so, how is it similar or different from other practices we might engage in?
Yeah, okay. I think what I got lost in was like, so personal discernment is one thing, but a group discernment, I think that's more challenging. When it comes to personal discernment, like I mentioned Mahatma Gandhi, like while he was leading India in this whole, freedom movement, he spent one day, every Monday in silence. And the reason for that was to listen to his deep inner voice. And he says, if that inner voice dies, my whole movement is a mess. So again, connecting with that deep inner voice, as an individual, but as a group, how do we follow that in a group? That was your question, right? So the examine, what are the steps?
Yeah. I think that's a piece of it. Nicky, could I come to you? How do you see discernment as a practice? And if so, how is it different from some others?
Yeah, for me at least, it's really kind of like, in terms of a practice, it's trying to make sure that what you are doing is true to your purpose, what gives you passion, what excites you. Paul spoke about intuition, right? And so reflection and meditation and some of these other things, they help me live a more meaningful life. But discernment allows me to kind of make decisions or whatever they say, even if it's not about decision making as such, but kind of like, organizing my life in a way that gives me the greatest meaning and is true to who I am and want to be.
Well, Nicky, I heard you say something, and maybe David will type into the chat. I loved it. Organizing my life to have the greatest meaning. I don't know, that just resonates with me. And Ron is somebody I know that may resonate with you, or please give your comment or question.
Well, I want to call on Radmila, who gave us a wonderful description of exactly what the question was. And I sent you a chat, Radmila, saying it's okay to call on you, but you described it so well in our group of how this was different from the usual kinds of things you had been taught before.
All right, so sorry, Radmila, you're on mute right now. If you want to come off mute, and then Mary, I'll come to you after that.
Hi, everyone. So before I begin, I'd like to say how grateful I am to be here with you this evening. I started off my thought about discernment as a process of submission to something bigger than ourselves, and how contrary it is to something that I have been not brought up with, but something that I studied either in academic theories or spiritual practices, and that is to be a giver rather than a receiver. So in the process of submitting to something that is bigger than ourselves, then the process, thank you very much, then the process of discernment becomes something that is holistic or becoming a part of something bigger than ourselves. Yeah. So to me, this is something refreshing, as in the methodologies that I have studied, it is us who are taking active roles rather than being receivers. So that's about what I have been telling in our breakout room. Have I missed anything? My mates from the group, was it?
Yeah, no, I just wanted, she said it so crisply that usually we're seeking, but when she said we receive it as opposed to grabbing it, we receive it. So thank you, Radmila.
Yeah, Ron and Radmila, thank you both. Mary, I'm going to come to you for your comment or question.
Yes, I was just wanting to respond to Elena, and that was that another practice that I have been aware of for many decades is a Quaker process of discernment. So there's a practice And so Quakers meet in silence, but it's not a meditation. It's not a single meditation that's happening. It's a corporate meditation. And people speak out of that which perhaps may come up for them. And it may be a whole silent meeting, or it may be a few people talking briefly about something that has really just come up and seemed like it wasn't just for them, but inside felt like it was for the group. And so when friends meet, and I'm thinking about boardrooms, I'm thinking about classrooms, I'm thinking about faculty meetings, all of that. One of the things that I did was to have a Quaker who had been a Quaker all her life come to speak to our faculty and to our doctoral students at Case Western and talk about how they do business. And so one of the important things is that on the agenda, she said, when you come to any kind of business meeting with Quakers, what you understand is that it's not about the agenda as being the first thing. The first thing is the fact that we are building every moment a community. And so that community actually builds trust. And then discernment can happen. And the way business happens is something that's quite beautiful. And so I just wanted to say that there are things that kind of build up, but it is people practicing contemplative practices in their own life, but also recognizing how important the corporate or the collaborative discernment is. And if I have a problem and I want some clearness, I can call for a discernment group, and I can choose those people to be on it, and they listen. And they don't ask any questions of me that aren't honest questions. Honest in the sense that they're not trying to give advice. They're just really listening. And the way they listen ends up creating a situation where the person who's receiving their listening energy, actually it's so deep that you begin to explore the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual dimensions of your lack of clearness about something, and it becomes clear because you can begin to understand your way forward with that support. So that's just another practice, and it's I appreciate very much what's been said.
Karen, thank you so much for sharing that with us, and to just acknowledge discernment is the lines of any one spiritual tradition or even no spiritual tradition, but the opportunity to reflect, connect, love, perhaps incorporate some decision making in there. So before I go to Jim and Ravi real quick, Nicky and Paul, anything you wanted to jump in with before I get a couple more comments?
No, I just loved what Mary shared, and then one thing that kind of stood out for me was that whole I think what could be a predisposition of listening, right? Because listening requires humility. It requires the willingness to kind of let go of my own position to open myself up to what someone else is sharing. And so, a lot of things which Mary shared were, spot on. I liked what she shared.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to jump to Jim and then Ravi. We got about 5 minutes left. Jim, what would you like to add? And you're on mute. I'm sorry, Jim.
There it is, finally. Sorry. Thank you very much. This has been a really interesting session for me and helpful, and I like to watch the video afterwards. A bunch of things came up for me. One was that when I was consulting about 30 years ago with Richardson Merrill, I discovered that as I was a process consultant in those days, we called them, now we call it a facilitator, I discovered that I would go into a meeting with a desired answer, although I was a facilitator. And if I would not pay any attention to that and turn it off entirely and be in the meeting with no preferences, no attempt to influence or anything like that, the results were much better than if I had some input substantively. And I thought that was an awful lot of movement towards discernment with me. I've been trying to figure out what discernment is, and also what mission is. And another thing that came up for me is the wonderful quotation attributed to Goethe, but actually from Murray, about commitment. Until you, I looked for it, couldn't find it, but until you're committed, then there's all kinds of ineffectiveness. But once you're committed, all kinds of wonderful things happen to you. I quoted that twice this week, and I can't find it right now. I would like to watch the video again, and this is what I needed right now. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate it. Ravi, I'm going to come to you.
I worked at Xavier University in Cincinnati, which is one of the 28 Jesuit schools of business. And I have gone through that exam process, the Jesuit process. And I have a paper that relates the business knowledge, which is focused on efficiency and effectiveness, and the Jesuit spiritual knowledge. I try to look at the overlaps between those two. And I think there are a lot of commonalities between those two, because my deeper understanding of what discernment process is, as it relates to business knowledge, is it is awareness. You're becoming aware, and awareness is a prelude to action. I put this in the chat so that even if I don't have a chance to talk, it's already there. So awareness is a prelude to action. Or at least it must be a prelude to action. Otherwise, what happens is it's like the difference between navigating and charting a clear course and making the corrections as you go. And the other alternative is hopping in a boat and setting off and trying to figure out on the fly. So you have to really understand the internal context and the external context if you want to be really effective and efficient in your decision making. Otherwise, what happens is you're just being lost. The main difference between the spiritual thinking and the business thinking is the emphasis is more on internal context, the inner journey, like Mahatma Gandhi's quote. You're going deeper and deeper into yourself. Whereas business knowledge really emphasizes a good and comprehensive understanding of both inner and outer contexts. That's all I have to say.
Bobby, thank you so much for that. I hail from Cincinnati, Ohio originally, so it was great to make that connection. With just a couple moments left, Nicky and Paul, I want to give you a chance for a final statement before we take leave of one another. What else would you like to share with the group?
Well, I just enjoyed the comments, in the interaction, and I learned, I learned a lot from your sharing, awareness is the beginning of change. Awareness, if it's just awareness, is useless. And then the whole power of listening, and so yes, and I have got a lot of thinking to do, and a lot to process from. So I want to thank all of you. This is my first webinar, my first, experience of talking to people, like so many people on the screen. So I teach in a classroom and I teach, people, and that's a different kind of thing altogether. So thank you very much.
Well, and thank you, Paul. Nicky, a final comment?
Yeah, sure. I enjoyed the conversation, and I think there was a lot of rich sharing. I loved what Raj said about more than myself, right? To be attentive to a bigger picture. What Mary shared about the Quaker movement and on listening. I think there was a lot of great wisdom that came out from our conversation, and so again, it is I think a testimony of how these conversations and our shared experiences make it even more enriching. So thank you, Brian, for having us. Yeah.
And this was kind of, like discernment in practice.
Yes, it was a collective experience of reflecting upon and considering where we go from here. So I want to thank everybody. I know we're at time. Please join us for our next webinar in 2 weeks, not next week, in 2 weeks, where we continue to explore these topics. And thanks to everybody who shared and participated. This is the type of engagement we hope to create at the Humanistic Leadership Academy. We're so thankful for your time today. So take care, everybody, wherever you go next, whether it's the end of your day or your beginning. We hope that you're connected to that deepest part of yourself that you want to bring forward. Thank you all.
Thank you.